The thunder of hoofbeats shattered the Montana dawn like the crack of Judgment Day itself. And Emma Whitmore's heart slammed against her ribs with the force of a sledgehammer as she pressed herself flat against her mother's grave. The cracked mason jar tumbled from her trembling hands, scattering purple lupine across the disturbed earth like drops of blood against snow, while 5 riders crested the ridge at full gallop, their horses' hooves drumming a death march against the hard-packed ground. Through the acrid smell of smoke still clinging to the ranch ruins, like the ghost of her former life, she could hear her mother's final words echoing in her mind, with painful clarity. Remember, little flame, courage isn't the absence of fear, it's dancing with it. Dance with your fear and let it make you stronger than they ever dreamed possible. Those had been Sarah Whitmore's last coherent words, spoken through lips cracked with fever and pain, as the consumption finally claimed her gentle spirit. Emma had thought they were the ramblings of a dying woman, words meant to comfort a 17-year-old girl facing a world without parents. Now, with death riding toward her on horseback, she understood that her mother had been preparing her for this moment. "Found you, little dove." Amos Garrett's voice cut through the morning air like a blade drawn across bone, each word carefully measured and delivered with the patient cruelty of a cat playing with wounded prey. The massive outlaw swung down from his horse with surprising grace. For a man of his bulk, his pale eyes fixed on Emma with the hungry intensity of a wolf studying a crippled deer. "Been looking all over God's green earth for you, girl. Turned over every rock, searched every hidey hole from here to the Canadian border." Emma's fingers found the wooden cross she'd hammered together from barn planks just 3 days ago, her mother's name carved in uneven letters that now seemed to mock her with their crude permanence. Sarah Whitmore. Born 1831. Died 1877. Wife, mother, friend. Such simple words to mark the end of a life that had been anything but simple, Emma was beginning to realize. The earth beneath the cross was still soft from recent digging, still reeking of fresh death, and the shattered dreams of a young woman who thought she understood her place in the world. The wooden marker stood crooked against the vast Montana sky, a testament to grief and haste, and the desperate need to lay the dead to rest before the living followed them into the ground. "Leave me be." Emma whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind that carried the stench of her burned home across the valley like incense from hell itself. "I got nothing you want, mister. Nothing but grief and ashes." Garrett's laughter was like breaking glass in a cathedral, sharp and wrong, and somehow blasphemous in the sacred space of mourning. "Oh, but you do, girl. You surely do." He stepped closer, his shadow falling across the grave like a dark omen, his boots crushing the scattered lupine petals into the dirt. "Your daddy left you something more valuable than gold, more precious than all the silver in Colorado. Question is, do you even know what it is?" The 4 men behind him spread out in a practiced semicircle, their movements coordinated with the precision of wolves surrounding a wounded buffalo. Emma recognized the scarred one called Morrison, his throat marked by a rope burn from some long-ago hanging that had failed to take a reminder that some men were too mean to die easy. The others were strangers, but their eyes held the same cold hunger she'd seen in the faces of men who'd forgotten what mercy looked like, who'd traded their souls for the temporary warmth of violence. "I don't know what you're talking about," Emma said, though her voice cracked like thin ice under spring sun, betraying the fear that threatened to overwhelm her completely. "Don't you?" Garrett knelt beside the grave with mock reverence, his thick fingers trailing through the scattered lupine petals like a man blessing a corpse. "Documents, girl. Papers that could change the whole damn territory, maybe the whole damn country. Your daddy was supposed to deliver them to me 15 years ago, but he got himself a case of conscience instead. Decided he was too good for the likes of us." Emma's mind reeled like a horse struck by lightning. Her father had been a quiet rancher, a man who read scripture by lamplight, and never raised his voice except to call cattle home or warn her away from the creek during spring flood. He'd been gentle and patient, teaching her to read from the good book and to see God's hand in every sunrise, every blade of grass, every breath of wind across the prairie. What could such a man possibly know about stolen documents and criminal conspiracies? "You're lying," she said. But the words felt hollow as a dead man's promise, empty as the burned-out shell of her childhood home. "Am I?" Garrett's smile revealed teeth stained brown by tobacco and meanness, a grin that belonged on a skull more than a living face. Ask yourself why John Whitmore would choose to settle in this godforsaken valley so far from civilization that a man could disappear for months without raising questions. Ask yourself why he built his spread around a single water source, like a fortress guarding its treasure. Ask yourself why he kept a loaded rifle by his bed every night for 15 years and why he never talked about his past. The wind picked up scattering dust devils across the charred skeleton of what had been her home, and Emma pulled her torn shawl tighter around her shoulders. The morning heat was already building, promising another scorching day in a summer that seemed determined to burn everything she'd ever loved to ash and memory. "Your daddy was one of us, girl." Garrett continued his voice, dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more threat than his loudest shout. "Rode with my boys back in Colorado, stealing government documents and selling them to the highest bidder. We were patriots, you understand, taking information from corrupt officials and making sure it got to the right people. But then your daddy got religion, or maybe just got yellow and ran off with something that didn't belong to him." Emma's mouth went dry as alkali dust. Her father, a document thief, a man who'd consorted with outlaws and criminals, it couldn't be true. The man who'd taught her to pray, who'd shown her how to gentle a wild horse with patience and kindness, who'd read her stories from the Bible every night. That man couldn't have been a criminal. "You killed them." She said the words barely escaping her constricted throat. "I collected what was owed." Garrett corrected with the patience of a man explaining arithmetic to a child. "Your mama fought like a wildcat, I'll give her that. Died with her fingernails full of Morrison's blood and fire in her eyes. But she died knowing she'd married a thief and a betrayer, knowing that all their years of happiness were built on stolen goods and broken promises." Rage flared in Emma's chest like gunpowder touched by flame, hot and sudden and all-consuming. "Don't you dare talk about her like that. Easy, little dove." Garrett's hand moved to his gun with practiced ease, the motion so smooth it seemed choreographed. "Save your fire for when it counts. You're going to need every spark before this is over." A shadow fell across the wooden cross, and Emma's heart stopped beating for one eternal moment. A Lakota warrior stood 20 feet away, his weathered face marked by years of war and wisdom that ran deeper than the canyon walls. His silver-streaked hair was braided with eagle feathers, and his buckskin shirt bore the scars of old battles fought and won. Most striking of all were his eyes, dark as midnight, deep as mountain lakes, and filled with a sadness that seemed to carry the weight of his people's suffering. "Well, well." Garrett drawled his voice thick with the kind of contempt that had started wars and ended civilizations. "Looks like the little dove's found herself a savage protector." The warrior stepped forward, his movements fluid and controlled, as water flowing over stone, each step deliberate and purposeful. "I am Running Wolf of the Minneconjou Lakota, chief of the Spotted Elk Band. The woman is under my protection." "Is she now?" Garrett's smile was a predator's grin, all teeth and malice. "And what makes you think I give a tinker's damn about your protection, Chief? Because your men are outnumbered." Running Wolf said, gesturing toward the ridge where a dozen painted warriors sat their horses like bronze statues against the morning sky. "Because this is Wakan's sacred ground, and you have already spilled innocent blood here. And because the woman's mother was known to my people as Wape Wicha Picta, she who shares bread." Emma's breath caught like a fishhook in her throat. Her mother had known the Lakota, but that was impossible. Sarah Whitmore had been a God-fearing woman who'd never left the valley except for supplies and the occasional church social in Cedar Falls. She'd been afraid of Indians, or so Emma had always believed, crossing herself whenever they spotted warriors on the distant ridges, praying for protection from the heathen savages who threatened Christian settlers. How touching, Garrett sneered. A regular family reunion. Here's what's gonna happen, girl. You're gonna tell me where your daddy hid those documents, or I'm gonna start shooting your new friends. Starting with the old man here. I don't know anything about documents. Emma's voice cracked with desperation, the words torn from her throat like pieces of her soul. I swear on my mother's grave, I don't know what you're talking about. Then you better learn fast, Garrett said, drawing his gun with the smooth motion of a man who'd done it 1,000 times before. Because my patience is thinner than paper and twice as likely to burn. Running Wolf's hand moved to his rifle, but he didn't draw it. Instead, he spoke in rapid Lakota to his warriors, his voice carrying across the valley like wind through pine trees. The painted men shifted on their horses, arrows nocked, but not yet drawn, rifles ready, but not yet aimed. You speak their gibberish too, do you? Garrett asked Emma mockingly. What other secrets did your mama keep from you, little dove? What other lies did she tell you about who you really are? Emma's mind raced, trying to process the implications of what she was hearing. Her mother had known the Lakota language, had dealt with them regularly enough to earn a name in their tongue. What else had Sarah Whitmore hidden from her daughter? The documents. Garrett continued his gun, now aimed at Running Wolf's chest. Government treaties, land grants, territorial agreements. Your daddy was supposed to deliver them to my employer in Denver, but he got cold feet at the last minute. Decided he couldn't trust us with information that powerful. What employer? Emma asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Men with more money than God and fewer scruples than the devil himself, Garrett replied. Politicians who wanted to know what the government was planning, businessmen who wanted to buy territorial rights before they went public. Your daddy was supposed to steal the documents and sell them to the highest bidder, but instead he kept them for himself. The morning erupted in chaos without warning. Running Wolf's warriors swept down from the ridge like a thunderstorm made flesh, their war cries echoing off the canyon walls in a harmony older than the stones themselves. Garrett's men scrambled for cover, drawing their weapons as arrows began to fall among them like deadly rain. Emma threw herself flat against her mother's grave, pressing her face into the soft earth as bullets whined overhead. The wooden cross splintered under impact, sending fragments of wood flying like shrapnel. The world exploded into noise and violence, the peaceful morning shattered by the sound of men dying. This ain't over, girl, Garrett shouted as he swung back into his saddle, his horse dancing sideways under his bulk. You can't hide behind your pet savages forever. I'll find you, and when I do, you'll wish your daddy had never been born. Emma watched them ride away, her heart still hammering against her ribs like a caged bird trying to escape. The Lakota warriors circled the ranch, their faces painted for war, their movements precise and deadly as winter wolves. She should have been terrified, but instead she felt oddly safe, as if her mother's spirit had sent these men to protect her. The battle was over as quickly as it had begun, but the silence that followed was somehow more unsettling than the violence. Emma slowly raised her head, looking around at the scene of destruction. The wooden cross lay in pieces, her mother's name obliterated by gunfire. The scattered lupine petals were trampled into the dirt, mixed with blood and gunpowder residue. Why did you help me? She asked Running Wolf, her voice small in the vast morning silence. The chief studied her face for a long moment, as if reading a story written in a language only he could understand. His dark eyes seemed to look straight through her, seeing things she hadn't even known were there to be seen. Because your mother saved my people when the winter was hard and the soldiers burned our stores, he said finally. because honor creates obligation that survives even death, and because you carry her eyes that see both sides of the world, even when the world tries to blind you to the truth. Emma touched her face reflexively. She'd always been told she had her mother's eyes green as prairie grass in summer, her father used to say, before the cancer took his voice and left him whispering scripture in the darkness. I don't understand any of this. She whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind that carried the acrid smell of gunpowder across the valley. Understanding comes with time and blood, Running Wolf said gently. But first you must choose. Stay here and die when Garrett returns with more men, and he will return, make no mistake about that, or come with us and learn what it means to truly live. Emma looked at the destroyed cross, at the scattered flowers, at the burned ruins of everything she'd ever known. Her mother's final words echoed in her mind again. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's dancing with it. Will you teach me to fight? She asked, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Running Wolf's weathered face cracked into something that might have been a smile. I'll teach you to survive, Emma Whitmore. Everything else will follow like shadows behind the sun. As they prepared to leave, Emma knelt beside her mother's grave one more time. The broken cross lay in pieces around the disturbed earth, but the grave itself remained intact. She gathered the scattered lupine petals, pressing them between her fingers, like a prayer made tangible. I don't know who you really were, Mama, she whispered to the silent earth. But I'm gonna find out, and I'm gonna make sure your secrets don't die with you. The ride to the high country took most of the morning, the horses picking their way carefully up treacherous mountain paths that seemed to have been carved by wind and time rather than human hands. Emma rode behind Running Wolf, clinging to his belt as they climbed higher and higher into country that few white people had ever seen. The landscape changed as they ascended the harsh browns and yellows of the valley floor, giving way to the deep greens of pine forest and the stark beauty of red rock formations. Emma had never been this high in the mountains, had never seen the world spread out below her like a map drawn by God's own hand. Your mother loved this country, Running Wolf said as they paused at an overlook to rest the horses. She said it reminded her of her childhood, before the world taught her to be afraid. Where was she from? Emma asked. Originally, I mean, before she married my father. Running Wolf's expression grew distant, as if he were looking backward through time to events that had shaped all their lives. That's not my story to tell, Emma Whitmore. But I will say this, your mother was a woman of two worlds, and she paid a high price for trying to live in both. The Lakota camp was hidden in a natural amphitheater between towering red cliffs, invisible from the valley floor, like a secret kept by the stone itself. Teepees dotted the landscape like wildflowers after rain, their painted hides telling stories and symbols Emma couldn't read, but somehow understood in her bones. Children played between the lodges, while women worked over smoking fires, their voices creating a harmony that reminded her of wind through pine trees on quiet evenings. The camp was larger than Emma had expected, with perhaps 60 or 70 people of all ages. She saw warriors with scars from old battles, women with calloused hands from years of hard work, children whose eyes held the wisdom of those who'd learned early that life was not a game. This was a community, a family, a people who'd survived against impossible odds. They're wondering why I brought a white girl here, Running Wolf said, reading her expression as easily as he might read tracks in mud. What do you tell them? Emma asked, suddenly conscious of her pale skin and different features. That your mother's spirit runs in your blood like a river finding its way to the sea. That debt must be honored even across the grave. That some bridges are built not with wood and stone, but with courage and trust. He dismounted near a teepee, painted with images of elk dancing under stars. Some will accept you quickly. Others will test you like fire tests metal. You must prove yourself worthy of their trust. A woman emerged from the lodge, her graying hair braided with silver ornaments, that caught the light like fallen stars. Smallpox scars marked her face like a map of survival, but her eyes were sharp and intelligent as a hawk's. She spoke rapidly in Lakota, her tone questioning, but not unfriendly. "Stone Crow Woman asks if you're as stubborn as your mother," Running Wolf translated. "I told her you're probably worse, but that might be what saves you." Despite everything, Emma found herself smiling. What did she say to that? She said good. Stubborn women live longer in times when the world tries to break them. Running Wolf's expression grew serious. But she also said something else. She said your mother carried great sadness like a stone in her chest. She wants to know if you carry the same burden. Emma thought about her mother's quiet moments, the times she'd found her staring toward the mountains with tears on her cheeks, humming songs that didn't sound like any hymns Emma knew. "I don't know what my mother was sad about. She never talked about her past. Perhaps that's something you'll discover while you're here," Running Wolf said. "The past has a way of revealing itself when we're ready to understand it." Stone Crow Woman stepped forward, her weathered hands, reaching out to touch Emma's face. She spoke in Lakota, her voice soft but intense, then nodded as if confirming something she'd already suspected. "What did she say?" Emma asked. "She said you have your mother's eyes, but your father's stubborn jaw. She said that's a dangerous combination, eyes that see too much and a jaw that won't give up." Running Wolf almost smiled. "She also said you're too thin. She's going to feed you until you're strong enough to survive what's coming." Over the following days, Emma threw herself into learning with the desperation of someone who knew survival depended on it. Stone Crow Woman taught her to scrape hides until her hands were raw and bleeding, to identify edible plants from poisonous ones, to read weather signs and the behavior of animals. The work was harder than anything she'd ever done, but it gave her something to focus on besides the ache in her chest. "Your mother learned these things too," Stone Crow Woman said one evening as they worked by firelight, her English careful but clear. But she never lost her white woman's softness. "You must choose soft or strong. There is no middle ground when men like Garrett hunt you." "What was she like?" Emma asked, her hands never stopping their work on the hide. "My mother when she was here." Stone Crow Woman's scarred face grew thoughtful. "Like a bird, with one wing in each world, never quite able to rest in either. She brought us food when we were starving, medicine when we were sick, blankets when our children shivered in the cold. But she also brought sorrow, like a shadow that followed wherever she went." "What kind of sorrow?" "The kind that comes from losing family to violence. The kind that makes a woman wake up screaming in the night, calling names of people who exist only in memory." Stone Crow Woman's voice dropped to a whisper. She wore mourning beads beneath her white woman's dress. White beads for children lost to soldiers' bullets. Emma's hand stilled on the hide. Children, brothers and sisters perhaps. Or maybe children of her own, I never knew for certain. She never spoke of it directly, but grief has its own language, and I learned to read it in her eyes. Stone Crow Woman's expression grew distant. Once I saw her remove her dress to wash in the stream. Her back was covered in scars, long white lines like the marks a whip makes, or perhaps claws. When she caught me looking, she said they were reminders of lessons she'd learned too young. Emma felt ice forming in her veins. "What kind of lessons?" "The kind that teach a child to be afraid of her own shadow, to flinch when hands reach toward her, to expect pain where others find comfort." Stone Crow Woman's voice grew hard. "Your mother was hurt badly when she was young, Emma. Hurt in ways that left scars on her soul as well as her body. The hardest lessons came from a young warrior named White Bull, whose face was marked with ritual scars that told the story of his courage. He was perhaps 25, with intelligent eyes and a quiet manner that reminded Emma of her father. But where her father had been gentle, White Bull was hard-forged by a lifetime of fighting for his people's survival. Hesitation is death, he told her as she practiced throwing a knife at a scarred wooden post, his voice carrying the weight of bitter experience. When the moment comes, you must choose your life or theirs. There is no honor in dying for nothing, no wisdom and mercy toward those who would show you none. Emma's throws were wild at first, the knife spinning end over end before clattering harmlessly against the post. But White Bull was patient, showing her how to grip the handle, how to gauge the distance, how to put her whole body behind the throw. Your mother was different, he said as Emma practiced. She could throw a knife with deadly accuracy, but she always hesitated before making the killing blow. She said every life was sacred, even the lives of those who would take hers. But how do you know? Emma asked, pulling her knife from the wood. How do you know when someone deserves to die? White Bull's expression grew grave. When they have already shown you who they are. When they have proven that words mean nothing to them, that only force speaks a language they understand. Your Garrett is such a man. He will not stop until he is stopped. You think I'll have to kill him. I think you'll have to choose between his life and the lives of innocent people. When that moment comes, remember that mercy toward the evil is cruelty toward the good. White Bull's scarred face was impassive. Your mother never learned that lesson. It's why she died. Emma's blood ran cold. What do you mean? She had chances to stop Garrett before he reached your ranch. She knew he was coming, knew what he wanted, knew he would kill to get it. But she hoped she could reason with him, convince him to leave your family alone. White Bull's voice grew bitter. Hope is a luxury the weak cannot afford. That evening, Emma sat alone at the edge of the camp while watching the sun set behind the mountains. The sky was painted in shades of gold and crimson, beautiful and terrible at the same time. She thought about her mother's secrets, about the documents Garrett sought, about the choices that had led them all to this moment. You're thinking too much, a young voice said behind her. Emma turned to see a girl of perhaps 13 with bright eyes and a curious expression. She was beautiful in the way that Lakota women were beautiful, not delicate like white women, but strong and vital with the kind of beauty that came from living in harmony with the natural world. I'm Little Sparrow, the girl said, settling beside Emma on the rocky ledge. Running Wolf is my father. Emma studied the girl's face, seeing the resemblance in the intelligent eyes and determined chin. I'm Emma. Nar, I know who you are, Little Sparrow said. The whole camp knows. You're the daughter of she who shares bread and the woman who saved us during the starving winter. Tell me about her, Emma said quietly. Tell me about my mother when she was here. Little Sparrow's expression grew thoughtful. She came to us when I was very young, maybe 6 or 7 years old. The soldiers had burned our winter stores, and our people were dying of hunger. She brought meat and corn blankets for the baby's medicine for the sick. She risked her life riding through hostile territory, never asking for payment or recognition. But why? Why would she risk so much for strangers? Because she remembered what it meant to be hungry, to be hunted, to lose everything you love and have to start again with nothing but the clothes on your back and the fire in your heart. Little Sparrow's voice grew sad. She told me once that she'd been a little girl when soldiers came to her village. She said she hid in the rocks while her family was killed, and she never forgot the sound of children crying for mothers who couldn't answer. Emma's heart clenched. What village? What soldiers? I don't know all the details. But she said it was in Colorado during the war between the white man and the Cheyenne. She said the soldiers called it a great victory, but she called it the day the world ended. Little Sparrow's eyes grew distant. She said she learned that day that cruelty has no limits, that some men will kill children as easily as they would kill animals. Sand Creek. Emma had heard the name whispered in church, had seen the newspaper accounts of the battle that had broken the back of Cheyenne resistance in Colorado. But she'd never imagined that her mother had been there had been one of the survivors of that terrible day. She was Cheyenne. Emma asked, her voice barely a whisper. Part Cheyenne, part white, but raised by the Cheyenne until the soldiers came. After the massacre, she was taken to a place where Indian children were taught to be white, a place where they tried to kill the Indian in her and leave only the white. Little Sparrow's voice grew hard. She said they nearly succeeded. Emma felt the world tilting around her. Her mother had been Indian, had survived a massacre, had been forced to abandon her people and her culture to survive. The gentle, God-fearing woman who'd raised her had been hiding a secret that large, that painful. She never told me any of this. Emma said, her voice cracking. Of course not. How could she? How could she tell her white daughter that she'd been born into a people the whites called savages? How could she explain that she'd learned to be white because the alternative was death? Little Sparrow's expression grew gentle. She loved you, Emma. She loved you enough to hide her true self so you could grow up safe and accepted. But she came here. She helped your people. She never really became white. No. Little Sparrow agreed. She never really became anything. She was caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. That's why she was so sad sometimes. She was always homesick for a home that no longer existed. That night, Emma lay in her borrowed robes, thinking about her mother's hidden life, about the secrets that had died with her. She'd thought she'd known Sarah Whitmore, but she'd known only the surface, the gentle woman who'd read Bible stories and sung lullabies, not the survivor who'd watched her family die and learned to live among the people who'd killed them. The next morning brought new lessons and new revelations. Stone Crow Woman taught her to recognize the signs of approaching weather, to read the behavior of animals for warnings of danger. White Bull showed her how to move silently through brush, how to become invisible in terrain that offered little cover. Your mother was good at these things, White Bull said as they practiced stalking through the forest. She could disappear like smoke, move like a shadow. But she never used those skills to protect herself, only to protect others. Maybe that's why she died, Emma said bitterly. Maybe. Or maybe she knew that some things are worth dying for. White Bull's expression grew serious. Your mother made a choice, Emma. She chose to be the bridge between two worlds, even knowing it would destroy her. The question is, what choice will you make? Emma didn't have an answer. She was still trying to understand the woman her mother had been, let alone figure out what kind of woman she herself might become. The answer came 2 weeks later, in the most brutal way possible. Emma was helping Stone Crow Woman prepare jerky when the sound of gunfire erupted from the camp's edge. Men were shouting, children screaming, and through it all came the thunder of hoofbeats and the whistle of bullets cutting through morning air like deadly insects. Soldiers. White Bull's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Take cover. Protect the children. Emma grabbed a rifle from the nearest warrior and scrambled up the rocks behind the camp. From her vantage point, she could see the attackers, a dozen men in military uniforms, their faces painted with war paint, like the very savages they claimed to fight. At their head rode a familiar figure, Amos Garrett, but not as she'd seen him before. He wore a cavalry officer's uniform decorated with campaign ribbons, his chest puffed with the pride of a man who'd never learned the difference between duty and cruelty. His face was twisted with hate and bloodlust as he led the charge into the camp, his voice rising above the sound of gunfire. Burn them out, he screamed his words, carrying across the valley like the howl of a mad wolf. Kill every last one of these murdering savages. Show them what happens to those who harbor fugitives. Emma watched in horror as the soldiers fired into the fleeing families. This wasn't a battle. It was a massacre. Children fell beside their mothers, elders died protecting their grandchildren. And through it all, Garrett's laughter echoed like the sound of hell itself opening its gates. Little Sparrow appeared at Emma's side, her young face pale with terror, but her hands steady on her father's spare rifle. What are they doing? Why are they killing us? I don't know. Emma said, but deep down, she did know. This was about her, about the documents, about secrets that had cost too many lives already. A bullet whined past her ear, and Emma saw one of the soldiers climbing toward their position. She raised her rifle, sighted carefully along the barrel, and squeezed the trigger. The recoil slammed against her shoulder as the man pitched backward off the rocks, his scream cut short by the sound of breaking bones. The sight of the man falling, of the blood spreading across his chest, should have horrified her. Instead, Emma felt a cold satisfaction. This was what White Bull had tried to teach her, that some men could only be stopped by force, that mercy toward the evil was cruelty toward the innocent. "Can you shoot?" Emma asked Little Sparrow, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. The girl nodded, her dark eyes fierce with determination. "Father taught me to hunt. Men are just another kind of animal." They fought side by side, two young women from different worlds united by blood and bullets. Emma's shots were wild but effective, while Little Sparrow's were precise and deadly as winter wind. Together, they held the high ground, while the battle raged below, like a vision of the world's end. But there were too many soldiers and too few warriors. One by one, the Lakota fell back, carrying their wounded with them in a retreat that spoke of experience with this kind of violence. Emma saw Running Wolf go down, blood streaming from a head wound, and felt her heart clench with fear. "We have to help him," she said, starting toward the rocks. "No." Little Sparrow grabbed her arm with surprising strength. "He told us to stay here, to hold the high ground no matter what happens below." Emma watched in anguish as the warriors retreated, dragging their wounded with them. The camp was in flames, the teepees burning like torches against the morning sky. Women and children fled toward the forest, carrying what belongings they could save. The life of the camp, built up over months of careful work, was being destroyed in minutes. A shadow fell across their position, and Emma looked up to see Garrett himself climbing toward them. His uniform torn and bloody, his face twisted with rage. Behind him came two more soldiers, their eyes bright with the madness of men who'd killed so much they'd forgotten how to stop. "There you are, little dove." Garrett snarled, his breathing hard from the climb. "Thought you could hide from me forever, did you?" Emma swung her rifle toward him, but he was faster. His gun barked once, and Little Sparrow cried out, blood blooming across her chest like a terrible flower opening to the sun. "No!" Emma screamed, dropping her rifle and catching the girl as she fell. Little Sparrow's eyes were already growing glassy, but she managed to whisper, "Tell Father. Tell him I was brave." The words died in her throat, and Emma felt something break inside her chest. This innocent girl, this bright flame of curiosity and laughter, was gone because of her, because of documents and secrets and the sins of fathers visited upon daughters. Touching. Garrett set his gun, now pointed at Emma's head. "But playtime's over, girl. You and I have business to discuss." Emma looked up at him, and for the first time in her life, she felt no fear. Only a cold, killing rage that burned like winter fire in her veins. "You're going to die," she said simply, her voice carrying a conviction that surprised even herself. Garrett's laugh was harsh as breaking glass. "Not today, little dove. Today you're going to tell me where your daddy hid those documents, and then you're going to watch while I burn this whole camp to the ground." He clubbed her with his gun butt, and the world went dark as a grave. Emma woke to the sound of water dripping somewhere in the darkness, each drop echoing like a countdown to her death. She was in a cave, her hands bound behind her back, with rawhide rope that cut into her wrists with every movement. The air was thick with the smell of damp stone and old death, and somewhere in the shadows she could hear the scurrying of rats. Garrett sat across from her, cleaning his gun by the light of a small fire that cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. He'd changed out of his military uniform and back into civilian clothes, But the transformation only made him seem more dangerous, like a wolf shedding sheep's clothing. "Welcome back, Sleeping Beauty," he said without looking up from his work. "We need to have ourselves a little chat about your daddy's legacy." Emma tested her bonds, but they were tight as a hangman's noose. Her head throbbed where he'd hit her, and she could taste blood on her lips. The cave was larger than she'd first thought, with passages leading off into darkness that seemed to swallow light itself. "Where are we?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "Safe house," Garrett said, snapping his gun closed with practiced efficiency. "Used to be a mine back in the day. Silver mine actually made a lot of men rich before the vein played out. Now it's just a hole in the ground where nobody can hear you scream." Emma looked around the cave more carefully. Old mining equipment lay scattered about: pickaxes, shovels, or carts rusted beyond use. The walls were scarred with the marks of men's labor, and in several places she could see the glint of quartz veins that had once held precious metal. "What do you want?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Same thing I've always wanted," Garrett said, holstering his gun. "Those documents your daddy stole from me. Treaties, land grants, territorial agreements, papers that could make a man rich beyond imagination if he knew how to use them properly." Emma's mind raced. She'd been thinking about the documents ever since Little Sparrow had told her about her mother's past. If her mother had been at Sand Creek, if she'd been taken to a government school, if she'd learned to move between two worlds. What if she'd been more than just a survivor? What if she'd been a spy? "I don't know," she began, but Garrett cut her off. "Don't." His voice carried the kind of quiet menace that made grown men wet themselves. "Don't lie to me, girl. I know your daddy told you something before he died. Some clue, some hint about where he hid my property." Emma's mind worked frantically. She genuinely didn't know where any documents might be hidden, but she was beginning to suspect that her parents had been involved in something far more complex than simple document theft. "He didn't tell me anything," she said desperately. "He died too fast. The fire. There wasn't time." Garrett studied her face by the firelight, his pale eyes searching for signs of deception. "Maybe. Or maybe you're just a better liar than I gave you credit for." He stood up, his shadow dancing on the cave walls like a demon from her worst nightmares. "Either way, we're going to find out." He walked to a wooden crate in the corner and pulled out a set of iron tools, pliers, pincers, things designed to cause pain rather than build anything useful. Emma's blood turned to ice water as she recognized them for what they were. "You're going to torture me." She said the words coming out steadier than she'd expected. "I'm going to persuade you." Garrett corrected, selecting a pair of pliers worn smooth by use. "There's a difference. Torture is what you do to enemies. Persuasion is what you do to business partners who've forgotten the terms of their agreements." He tested the pliers' grip, the metal clicking like bones breaking. "Now let's start with something simple. Your daddy ever mention a place called Sand Creek, a little skirmish we had with the Cheyenne back in '64? Emma's heart stopped. Sand Creek. The massacre where her mother had lost her family, where she'd learned to hide and survive. "What about it? Your daddy was there," Garrett said conversationally. "Not as a soldier, as a civilian contractor. Government wanted someone to document the battle, make sure the official reports were accurate. Your daddy was good with words, good at making things sound better than they were." Emma's world tilted. Her father had been at Sand Creek, had witnessed the massacre that had destroyed her mother's childhood. He was supposed to write a report that justified what we did. Garrett continued. "Make it sound like a glorious victory against hostile savages. But when he saw what really happened, when he saw us killing women and children, he changed his mind." "What do you mean?" "He wrote 2 reports. Garrett said, his voice growing hard. "One that told the official story, one that told the truth. The official report went to Washington. The true report, along with photographs, witness statements, and other evidence that was supposed to disappear. But your daddy kept it. Emma's mind reeled. Her father had documented the Sand Creek Massacre, had evidence that could expose the truth about what had happened there. That's what I'm after, Garrett said. Not just any documents, specific documents that could destroy careers, topple governments, maybe even start a war. Your daddy was supposed to destroy them, but he kept them as insurance. Insurance against what? Against me. Against the men who hired him. Against anyone who might try to silence him. Garrett's smile was cold as winter wind. Your daddy was smarter than I gave him credit for. He knew that as long as he had those documents, he was untouchable. Emma's thoughts were spinning. If her father had evidence of the Sand Creek Massacre, if he'd been blackmailing the men responsible, that would explain so many things, their comfortable life, their isolation, his constant vigilance. But then he made a mistake. Garrett continued. He fell in love with one of the survivors. Emma's blood ran cold. My mother. Your mother. A half-breed girl who'd been civilized in one of those government schools, who'd learned to pass for white. She was working as a translator for the Indian agency when your daddy met her. He thought he was being clever, marrying someone who could help him understand the Indian side of things. And she was smarter than both of us. She knew who he was, what he'd done, what he was hiding. She married him not for love, but for revenge. Garrett's eyes glittered with malice. She spent 15 years planning to destroy him, to take those documents and use them to expose the truth about Sand Creek. Emma shook her head. That's not true. She loved him. She loved us both. Did she love the idea of justice for her murdered family? Garrett leaned closer, his breath hot against her face. Your mama was playing a long game, girl. She was going to wait until you were old enough to understand, and then she was going to reveal everything, who your daddy really was, what he'd done, what she'd done to get close to him. You're lying, Emma whispered. But doubt was creeping into her voice like poison. Am I then? Why did she start making contact with Indian rights groups in the months before she died? Why did she write letters to newspapers in Denver and Chicago? Why did she start asking your daddy questions about his past? Garrett's smile was triumphant. She was getting ready to expose him, to destroy everything he'd built. That's why I had to act when I did. Emma felt tears streaming down her face. Was it possible? Had her mother been planning to betray her father? Had their entire family been built on lies and revenge? The documents, Garrett said, reaching for her hand with the pliers. Where did they hide them? I don't know, Emma sobbed. I swear I don't know. Wrong answer, Garrett said, and the pliers closed on her little finger. The pain was indescribable, like fire and ice combined into something that existed beyond human experience. Emma screamed, the sound echoing off the cave walls until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. But through the agony, her mind was still working, still trying to piece together the truth. If her mother had been planning to expose her father, if she'd been in contact with newspapers and Indian rights groups, then the documents might not be hidden at the ranch at all. They might be somewhere else, somewhere her mother could access them when the time was right. Where are they? Garrett asked again, releasing the pressure. Emma gasped, trying to think through the pain. The church, she said finally. She spent a lot of time at the church in Cedar Falls. Maybe she hid them there. Garrett studied her face, looking for signs of deception. The church. Why would she hide them in a church? Because it's the one place you'd never think to look. Emma said, the lie coming easier now. Because everyone there trusted her, thought she was a good Christian woman. She could come and go as she pleased, hide things in the basement or the bell tower. Garrett was quiet for a long moment, weighing her words. "If you're lying to me," he said finally, "I'll make what just happened look like a church social." "I'm not lying," Emma said, though her voice lacked conviction. "We'll see," Garrett said, "because we're going to that church. And if I don't find what I'm looking for..." He left the threat hanging in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. The ride to Cedar Falls took most of the night, Emma slung over a horse like a sack of grain. Her broken finger throbbed with each jarring step, but she forced herself to stay alert. She'd bought herself time with the story about the church. But what would happen when they found nothing there? Cedar Falls was a small town, barely more than a collection of buildings around a main street. The church sat on a hill overlooking the town, its white steeple reaching toward the stars, like a finger pointing to heaven. Emma had attended services there with her parents, had sat in the pews, listening to sermons about forgiveness and redemption. "Where in the church?" Garrett demanded as they approached the building. Emma looked around, trying to think. The church was old, built of local stone with a wooden steeple. There was a basement where they held social gatherings, a bell tower that housed the church bell, and a small office where the preacher prepared his sermons. "The basement," she said finally. "There's a root cellar under the basement where they store food for church suppers." She could have hidden them there. Garrett's men broke into the church easily. The old lock on the door, no match for their experience. Emma was dragged inside her hands, still bound her broken finger, sending waves of pain up her arm with every movement. The basement was dark and musty, filled with the smell of old wood and preserves. There was indeed a root cellar, a small space under the floor where vegetables and canned goods were stored. Emma watched with growing dread as Garrett's men searched through the shelves and boxes, knowing they would find nothing. "There's nothing here," one of the men reported after a thorough search. Garrett's face darkened with rage. "Then where the hell are they?" Emma's mind raced. She'd bought herself time, but now she was back where she started facing torture and death, with no idea where the documents might be hidden. "Maybe she moved them," she said desperately. Maybe she got suspicious, thought someone was watching her. "Where would she move them to?" Garrett demanded. Emma thought about her mother's habits, her daily routines. Where would a woman hide something precious, something that needed to be kept safe but accessible? "The trading post," she said suddenly. "Max Sullivan's trading post. She went there sometimes to buy supplies. Maybe she convinced him to hide them for her." Garrett's eyes narrowed. "Max Sullivan, the old trader up in the mountains?" "Yes." Emma said, her mind working frantically. She trusted him. And he's neutral. He deals with both whites and Indians. He'd be the perfect person to hold something like that. Garrett was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Emma could see the wheels turning in his mind, weighing the possibilities. "If you're lying again," he said finally, "I won't just kill you. I'll make you watch while I kill everyone you've ever cared about." "I'm not lying," Emma said, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. "We'll see," Garrett said, "because we're going to pay old Mac a visit." The ride to the trading post took 2 days through rough mountain country. Emma's condition worsened with each mile. Her broken finger was infected, her wrists were raw from the ropes, and she was weak from lack of food and water. But she forced herself to stay conscious, to keep thinking, to look for any opportunity to escape. The trading post was a ramshackle building squatting beside a mountain stream, its walls weathered silver by wind and rain. Emma could see smoke rising from the chimney, and her heart lifted with desperate hope. If Sullivan was there, if he was willing to help her, maybe she could find a way out of this nightmare. But as they approached the building, Emma saw something that made her blood run cold. There were too many horses tied outside, too many men moving around the building. This wasn't a simple trading post, it was a fortress. "Well, well," Garrett said, a smile spreading across his face. "Looks like old Mac's been expecting us." They dismounted in front of the building, and Emma was dragged inside. The interior was larger than she'd expected, with several rooms and what looked like a small armory. Men with guns stood at the windows watching the approaches. Max Sullivan emerged from a back room, but he wasn't the grizzled old traitor Emma remembered. This man was clean-shaven, well-dressed, and carried himself with the bearing of someone used to command. Garrett. He said, his voice cold. You're late. Had to make a detour, Garrett replied. But I've got what we need. Emma's mind reeled. Sullivan was working with Garrett, had been all along. She thought about their previous encounter, how he'd seemed to help her in Running Wolf. Had that all been an act? Where are the documents? Sullivan asked. That's what we're here to find out, Garrett said, gesturing to Emma. The girl knows where they are. She just needs a little more persuasion. Sullivan studied Emma's face, his expression unreadable. You've been rough with her. She's been stubborn, Garrett replied, but she's starting to see reason. Perhaps, Sullivan said, but I think there might be a better way. He approached Emma, his movements careful and non-threatening. Emma, isn't it? I'm sorry we have to meet again under these circumstances. You're working with him. Emma said, her voice hollow with betrayal. I'm working for the same people he is, Sullivan corrected. But that doesn't mean I approve of his methods. What people? Emma asked, though she was beginning to suspect she knew the answer. Government men, politicians, people who want to make sure certain embarrassing documents never see the light of day. Sullivan's expression was almost apologetic. Your father was supposed to destroy those documents 15 years ago. Instead, he kept them. That was a mistake. Emma's mind was working frantically. If Sullivan was government, if he had official backing, then this was bigger than just one outlaw's greed. This was about covering up a massacre, about protecting the men who'd ordered it. The documents. Sullivan continued. Where are they? Emma looked around the room at the armed men, at Garrett's impatient face. She was outnumbered, outgunned, and out of options. But she was also her mother's daughter, and she'd learned something important in the past few weeks. They're not hidden anywhere, she said quietly. What do you mean? Sullivan asked. My mother didn't hide them. She destroyed them. Emma's voice grew stronger. She burned them the night before she died, along with her letters to the newspapers. She said some secrets were too dangerous to keep. Garrett's face went white with rage. You're lying. Am I? Emma looked directly at him. Think about it. My mother was dying. She knew she didn't have long. What would she do with documents that could destroy innocent people? Would she leave them for her daughter to find, or would she make sure they could never hurt anyone again? Sullivan's expression was thoughtful. That would be unfortunate, but not necessarily believable. There's one way to find out, Emma said. The ashes. They're still in the fireplace at the ranch. You can sift through them, see what's left. She was lying, of course. She had no idea whether there were any documents where they might be hidden or what her mother had done with them. But she was buying time, trying to think of a way out of this nightmare. Boss, one of Sullivan's men called from a window. We've got riders coming, a lot of them. Emma's heart leaped. Could it be Running Wolf and his warriors? Had they tracked her here? But when she looked out the window, her hope died. The riders were soldiers, real soldiers this time, not Garrett's men in stolen uniforms. They were coming up the mountain trail in formation and their weapons ready. Cavalry, Sullivan said grimly. About 30 men. Who called them? Garrett demanded. I did, Sullivan said calmly. Insurance in case things went wrong. Emma's mind raced. If the cavalry was here, if they were working with Sullivan, then this was an official operation. The government was willing to use military force to keep the Sand Creek documents buried. What are your orders? Garrett asked. Clean up the mess. Sullivan said simply. No witnesses, no evidence, no problems. Emma realized with crystal clarity That they were all going to die, herself Running Wolf, if he was still alive, anyone who knew about the documents. This wasn't just about covering up a massacre. It was about eliminating everyone who could expose the truth. "There's something you should know," she said quickly. "What?" Sullivan asked. "My mother didn't just write letters to newspapers. She sent copies of the documents to Indian rights groups, to politicians who oppose the Indian wars. Even if you kill me, even if you destroy everything at the ranch, there are copies out there." Sullivan's face went pale. "You're bluffing." "Am I? My mother spent 15 years planning her revenge." "Do you really think she'd put all her eggs in one basket?" Emma's voice grew stronger. "She was smarter than any of you gave her credit for. She knew this day would come, and she prepared for it." The sound of hoofbeats was getting closer. Emma could hear the cavalry forming up outside their horses, snorting and pawing the ground. Through the window, she could see officers conferring, planning their assault. "Sir," one of Sullivan's men said urgently, "the Indians are here too." Emma's heart leaped. Through the window, she could see Lakota warriors positioned on the ridges around the trading post. They were outnumbered by the cavalry, but they held the high ground and knew the terrain. "How many?" Sullivan asked. "Maybe 20. They've got the place surrounded." Emma smiled grimly. Running Wolf had come for her despite his wounds, despite the impossible odds. The old chief wasn't going to let her die without a fight. "This is getting complicated," Garrett said. "No," Sullivan said firmly. "This is getting resolved. Signal the cavalry. Tell them to attack the Indian positions. We'll clean up here and be gone before they're finished." But Emma was no longer listening. She was thinking about her mother's words about courage and fear, about the choices that defined a person's life. She thought about little Sparrow, who died protecting her. She thought about Running Wolf, who'd risked everything to give her a chance at survival. And she thought about the documents wherever they were and what they represented. Not just evidence of a massacre, but proof that some people were willing to fight for justice, even when the cost was everything they held dear. The battle began at dawn, with the cavalry charging up the mountain slopes toward the Lakota positions. Emma watched from the window as warriors and soldiers clashed in the rocks, their weapons flashing in the early light. The sound of gunfire echoed off the canyon walls, and she could see men falling on both sides. "Time to go," Sullivan said, grabbing Emma's arm. But before they could move, the door burst open, and Running Wolf stood there, his rifle trained on Sullivan's chest. The old chief was wounded, a blood staining his shirt, but his eyes were clear and deadly. "Let her go," he said simply. "One old Indian against 6 armed men." Sullivan laughed. "I don't think so." "Not just one," White Bull said, appearing in the doorway behind Running Wolf. "And not just Indians." Emma's heart soared as she saw who was with them: Stone Crow Woman, several other Lakota warriors, and to her amazement, Max Sullivan himself. The real Max Sullivan, the grizzled old trader she'd met before. "What the hell?" Garrett snarled. "The name's Sullivan." The real Max had his rifle trained on his imposter. "Max Sullivan, and you boys have been using my name and my trading post for your dirty work." Emma's mind reeled. The man she'd thought was Sullivan was an imposter, a government agent using the trader's identity as cover. But how had the real Sullivan found them? "Your mama was a smart woman," the real Sullivan said to Emma. "She knew she was being watched, knew someone was planning to move against her. So she made arrangements, insurance, you might say." "What kind of arrangements?" the fake Sullivan demanded. "She gave me copies of the documents months ago," the real Sullivan said, "along with instructions on what to do if anything happened to her or her family. I've been waiting for the right moment to act." Emma felt tears streaming down her face. Her mother had been planning for this, had been protecting her, even beyond the grave. The documents were safe, hidden with someone who could be trusted. "You're lying," Garrett snarled. "Am I?" The real Sullivan smiled grimly. Want to bet your life on it? The fake Sullivan was reaching for his gun when Running Wolf's rifle spoke. The government agent spun around, blood spreading across his chest, and fell to the floor. "Now it's just you and me, Garrett," the real Sullivan said. But Garrett was already moving, grabbing Emma and pressing his gun to her head. "I'll kill her," he said desperately. "I'll kill her right now." "No," Emma said quietly. "You won't." She drove her elbow back into Garrett's ribs, then threw herself forward as his gun fired. The bullet went wild, and White Bull's tomahawk took Garrett in the chest before he could fire again. Amos Garrett fell to his knees, blood frothing from his lips. He looked up at Emma, his eyes filled with hate and disbelief. "You think you've won?" he gasped. "You think this changes anything? There are 100 more like me, 1,000. You can't stop them all." "Maybe not," Emma said quietly, "but I can stop you." She picked up Garrett's fallen gun and pointed it at his chest. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then Emma lowered the weapon. "No," she said, "you're not worth it." Garrett died badly, his body racked with convulsions, as White Bull's tomahawk found its mark. Emma watched him go without regret, feeling only a profound sense of relief that the monster who destroyed her family was finally gone. The battle outside was winding down. The cavalry had retreated, their losses too heavy to continue the assault. The Lakota warriors were regrouping, tending their wounded, and counting their dead. "Is it over?" Emma asked. "This part is," Running Wolf said. "But the real fight is just beginning." He was right. The documents were safe, but they still needed to be revealed to the world. The truth about Sand Creek, about the government's attempts to cover it up, about the corruption that had led to so much death and suffering, all of it needed to be exposed. "What happens now?" Emma asked. "Now we go to the newspapers," the real Sullivan said. "We tell the world what really happened at Sand Creek. We make sure your mother's sacrifice means something." Emma nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She was no longer just a 17-year-old girl who'd lost her parents. She was the keeper of a terrible secret, the guardian of a truth that needed to be told. As they prepared to leave the trading post, Emma took one last look at the mountain country that had sheltered her, that had taught her who she really was. She thought about her mother's words about courage and fear, about the choices that defined a person's life. She'd made her choice. She would tell the truth no matter what the cost. She would honor her mother's memory and Little Sparrow's sacrifice by making sure the world knew what had happened at Sand Creek. The journey to Denver took a week, traveling carefully to avoid government forces that might still be hunting them. Emma rode with Running Wolf and his surviving warriors, while the real Sullivan brought up the rear with the precious documents. They made camp each night in hidden valleys, building small fires and sharing stories of the dead. Emma learned more about her mother during those quiet evenings than she'd learned in 17 years of living with her. She was caught between two worlds. Running Wolf said one night as they sat around the fire. "Never quite belonging to either, but trying to build bridges between them. That's what you're doing now, Emma. Building the bridge she dreamed of." "What if I'm not strong enough?" Emma asked. "You are," Stone Crow Woman said firmly. "You have your mother's heart and your father's stubborn streak. That's a powerful combination." Emma touched the silver necklace at her throat, feeling its familiar weight. She was Emma Whitmore, daughter of John and Sarah. She was also Dancing Flame, daughter of Two Worlds, guardian of a terrible truth. When they reached Denver, Emma was amazed by the size of the city. She'd never seen so many buildings, so many people, so much noise and activity. The newspapers were headquartered in impressive buildings downtown, and their printing presses running day and night. The editor of the Denver Post was a stern man named Harrison, who listened to their story with skeptical eyes. But when Sullivan produced the documents, photographs, witness statements, official reports, his expression changed dramatically. "Oh my God," he whispered, studying the evidence. This is incredible." These photographs, these testimonies, they prove that Sand Creek was a massacre, not a battle. "Will you print it?" Emma asked. "Print it." Harrison laughed bitterly. "Girl, this is the story of the century. This will change everything: the Indian Wars, the territorial government, maybe even the federal government. Of course I'll print it." The story broke 3 days later, with headlines that screamed across the front page: "Sand Creek Massacre Exposed, Government Cover-Up Revealed." The photographs were particularly damaging, showing the bodies of women and children, the burned village, the smiling soldiers posing with their victims. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Politicians demanded investigations, military officers were court-martialed, and the public was outraged by the revelation of government lies and cover-ups. But there was also a backlash: death threats, attempts to discredit the story, efforts to suppress further revelations. Emma found herself at the center of the storm and the face of the story that had brought down a government conspiracy. She testified before congressional committees, spoke to reporters, and met with Indian rights advocates who wanted to use her story to push for reform. It was exhausting and frightening, but she persevered. She thought about her mother's sacrifice, about little Sparrow's death, about all the innocent people who'd suffered because of the lies and cover-ups. Their deaths had to mean something. "You're going to die," she said simply, her voice steady as bedrock despite the gun aimed at her head. Garrett's laugh was harsh as breaking glass. "Not today, little dove. Today you're going to tell me where your daddy hid those documents. And then you're going to watch while I burn this whole camp to the ground, just like I burned your precious ranch." He clubbed her with his gun butt, and the world exploded into stars and darkness. Emma woke to the sound of water dripping somewhere in the blackness. She was in a cave, her hands bound behind her back, with rawhide rope that cut into her wrists with every movement. The air smelled of damp stone and old death, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the echo of her own breathing bouncing off unseen walls. "Welcome back, Sleeping Beauty." Garrett's voice came from across the cave. "We need to have ourselves a little chat about your daddy's legacy." Emma's eyes adjusted slowly to the dim light. Garrett sat beside a small fire, its flames casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. He was cleaning his gun with methodical precision, each movement deliberate and practiced. "Where are we?" she asked, testing her bonds. They were tight as a hangman's noose, expertly tied by someone who'd done this before. "Safe house," Garrett said without looking up from his work. "Used to be a silver mine back in the boom days. Now it's just a hole in the ground where nobody can hear you scream, and believe me, girl, you're going to scream before this is over." Emma looked around the cave, her heart sinking. It was larger than she'd first realized, with passages leading off into darkness that seemed to swallow light itself. Old mining equipment lay scattered about: picks, shovels, lengths of rope, all rusted and forgotten, like the dreams of men who'd come here seeking fortune and found only broken stone. "The documents," she said, though her throat felt raw. "What are they really? What makes them so important?" Garrett snapped his gun closed and holstered it, then stood and walked to a wooden crate in the corner. From it, he pulled out a leather portfolio, its edges worn smooth by handling. "Treaties," he said, opening the portfolio to reveal dozens of official-looking papers. Agreements between the territorial government and various Indian tribes. Some signed, some not. Some legitimate, some modified to suit certain interests. Emma's eyes widened as she saw the official seals, the signatures, the careful legal language. "Those are government documents. You stole them from the government. I liberated them," Garrett corrected. "From corrupt officials who were planning to use them to steal Indian land. Your daddy was supposed to help me get them to the right people who would make sure the treaties were honored, that the Indians got what they were promised." "But you're not trying to help the Indians," Emma said, confusion mixing with fear. Garrett's laugh was bitter. "Help them, girl. I've been fighting Indians my whole adult life. I've seen what they do to white families, to innocent children. I've seen the aftermath of their raids, the bodies left to rot in the sun. His voice grew harder. But I've also seen what we do to them. What we did at Sand Creek, what we're doing now. And I've learned that sometimes the only way to stop a war is to make sure both sides have something to lose. Emma stared at him, trying to understand. You're saying you want to give the treaties back to the Indians. I'm saying I want to sell them to the highest bidder. Garrett corrected. If the government wants them buried, they'll pay to keep them secret. If the Indians want them honored, they'll pay to get them back. Either way, I get rich, and maybe, just maybe, this God-forsaken territory finds some peace. That's not justice, Emma said. Justice. Garrett's eyes glittered in the firelight. There's no justice in this world, girl. Only power and the will to use it. Your daddy understood that once before he got soft. He pulled out a set of iron tools, pliers, pincers, implements designed to cause pain. Emma's blood turned to ice water as she recognized them from stories she'd heard whispered in town, stories of what happened to people who crossed men like Garrett. None now. Garrett said, selecting a pair of pliers worn smooth by use. Let's talk about where your daddy hid the real treaties. The ones he stole from me. I don't know what you're talking about, Emma said, but her voice cracked with fear. Don't you? Garrett knelt beside her, the pliers catching the firelight. Your daddy was smart, I'll give him that. He knew I'd come looking eventually, so he made copies of the treaties, good copies with forged seals and signatures. He gave me the copies and kept the originals for himself. Emma's mind raced. How do you know they were copies? Because I tried to sell them, of course. And the buyer, a very sophisticated gentleman from back east, took one look at them and laughed in my face. Said they were good forgeries, but forgeries nonetheless. Said the paper was wrong, the ink was wrong, the seals were wrong. Garrett's face darkened with remembered humiliation. 15 years I've been carrying worthless paper thinking I was rich. So what makes you think I know where the real ones are? Because your daddy was a sentimental fool, Garrett said simply. He wouldn't have destroyed them, they were too valuable. And he wouldn't have hidden them where anyone else could find them. He'd have put them somewhere safe, somewhere only family would think to look. The pliers moved closer to Emma's face, and she could smell the metal cold and sharp. Last chance, little dove. Where did your daddy hide the real treaties? Emma's mind raced, searching for any memory that might help her. Her father had been a careful man, methodical in everything he did. If he'd hidden something important, where would he have put it? I don't know, she said honestly. He never told me about any treaties. I didn't even know he had a criminal past until you told me. Wrong answer, Garrett said, and the pliers closed around her little finger. The pain was indescribable, like fire and ice combined into something that existed beyond human experience. Emma screamed, the sound echoing off the cave walls until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Garrett held the pressure for what felt like hours, though it was probably only seconds. Where are the treaties? He asked again, his voice conversational. Emma sobbed, unable to speak through the agony. Her finger was broken, she was sure of it, and the pain radiated up her arm like lightning through her bones. I can do this all night, Garrett said, moving to her next finger. Hell, I can do this all week. Question is how much of yourself you want to leave in this cave. Please, Emma gasped. I don't know. I swear I don't know. But even as she spoke, a memory surfaced, something her father had said once years ago, when she'd asked him about the strange symbols carved into the stone walls of the ranch's root cellar. He'd told her they were Indian markings, left by the people who'd lived there before the white man came. He'd said they were sacred, that they told the story of the people who were buried in the valley. The root cellar, she whispered. Garrett's eyes sharpened. What about it? My father. He said there were Indian symbols carved in the walls. He said they told stories about the people who lived there before us. Emma's voice grew stronger as the memory solidified. He used to go down there sometimes, late at night. I thought he was just checking on the preserved food, but maybe he was checking on something else. Something hidden behind the symbols. Emma looked up at Garrett, desperation in her eyes. If you're right, if he hid the treaties somewhere, only family would think to look, that's where they'd be. Behind the sacred symbols in the place where the old ones are buried. Garrett studied her face, looking for signs of deception. If you're lying to me, girl, I'll make what just happened feel like a gentle caress. I'm not lying, Emma said, and she realized she might actually be telling the truth. It made sense her father had been a man who respected the past, who would have seen the irony in hiding stolen Indian treaties behind Indian symbols. Then we're going back to that ranch, Garrett said. And if I don't find those treaties, you're going to discover what real pain feels like. The ride back to the ranch took most of the night, Emma tied to a horse like a sack of grain. Her broken finger throbbed with each jarring step, but she forced herself to stay alert. She had to look for opportunities to escape, had to find some way to turn the tables on her captor. But there were none. Garrett was too experienced, too careful. He watched her constantly, never giving her a moment's rest or privacy. By the time they reached the ranch, Emma was exhausted, her body aching from the rough ride. The burned ruins looked different in the moonlight, more desolate, more final. The blackened timbers reached toward the sky like the fingers of a dead man, and the silence was oppressive. Even the spring seemed to babble more quietly, as if the violence that had occurred here had muted its eternal song. "Show me," Garrett ordered as they dismounted. Emma led him to the root cellar, her heart pounding. The wooden door had been damaged in the fire, but was still intact. Garrett kicked it open, revealing stone steps leading down into darkness. "After you," he said, pushing her forward. The cellar was exactly as Emma remembered it, a small stone chamber carved directly into the hillside, its walls lined with shelves for storing preserved food. But now, looking at it with new eyes, she could see what her father had been talking about. The walls were covered with symbols, not random scratchings, but deliberate pictographs that told a story. "There," she said, pointing to a section of wall where the symbols seemed more elaborate. "Those look different from the others." Garrett examined the wall carefully, running his hands over the carved stone. "These are newer," he said. "Cut with metal tools, not stone. Your daddy's work." He began pressing on the stones, looking for loose ones. After several minutes, he found what he was looking for. A stone that moved slightly when pushed. "Got it," he said, and began working the stone free. Behind it was a small cavity, and inside that cavity was another leather portfolio. Garrett pulled it out with trembling hands, his eyes bright with greed. "This is it," he breathed. "This has to be it." He opened the portfolio carefully, revealing documents that looked similar to the ones Emma had seen before, but somehow different. The paper was older, the ink more faded, the seals more elaborate. "And these are the real ones," Garrett said, his voice filled with savage satisfaction. "These are the treaties that could change everything." Emma stared at the documents, trying to understand their significance. "What do they say?" "They say that most of Montana territory legally belongs to the Lakota," Garrett replied. "They say that the government made promises it never intended to keep, signed agreements it planned to ignore. They say that everything that's happened here, the wars, the massacres, the theft of Indian land, it's all been illegal." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. "And you're going to sell them to the highest bidder." "I'm going to auction them," Garrett corrected. "The government will pay millions to keep them buried. The Indians will pay millions to get them back. And I'll be rich enough to buy my own territory." "What about justice? What about doing what's right?" Garrett's laugh was cold. "Justice is for people who can afford it. I'm in the business of survival." He closed the portfolio and tucked it inside his coat. "But first, I have to tie up some loose ends." He drew his gun and pointed it at Emma's head. You've been very helpful, little dove. But I can't have you running around telling people about this. Emma closed her eyes, waiting for the shot that would end her life. But instead of gunfire, she heard something else, the sound of horses approaching at a gallop. What the hell? Garrett spun toward the cellar entrance. A voice called out across the valley, Max Sullivan's voice, but not as Emma had heard it before. This was the voice of a man in command, giving orders to others. Garrett, we know you're in there. Come out with your hands up. Garrett's face went through a series of emotions, surprise, anger, calculation. Sullivan, he growled. I should have known that old bastard would double-cross me. You hired Sullivan? Emma asked, confused. I hired him to find you, Garrett replied. But it looks like he's decided to cut himself in on the deal. They climbed out of the root cellar to find themselves surrounded. Sullivan was there, but he wasn't alone. With him were two other men Emma didn't recognize, hard-looking men with the bearing of professional soldiers. Let the girl go, Garrett. Sullivan called out. This is between you and me. Is it? Garrett's voice was mocking. And what makes you think you're entitled to a share of my prize? Because I'm the one who found her for you, Sullivan replied. Because I'm the one who's been tracking her movements, feeding you information. Because without me, you'd still be wandering the territory looking for a ghost. Emma's world tilted. Sullivan had been working for Garrett all along, and the man who'd shown her kindness, who'd given her shelter, had been a betrayer from the start. You bastard, she whispered. Sullivan's expression didn't change. Nothing personal, miss? Just business. Business. Garrett laughed. You want to talk business, fine. Here's my counteroffer. He grabbed Emma and pressed his gun against her temple. I walk away with the treaties, and the girl and you get to live. Try to stop me, and we both lose everything. You're outnumbered, Sullivan said, 3-1. Maybe, but I'm the one with the hostage. Garrett's voice was calm, confident. And I'm the one with nothing left to lose. Emma felt the cold metal of the gun barrel against her skin and knew she was going to die. But as she looked around at the men surrounding them, she saw something that gave her hope, movement in the shadows beyond the firelight. Running Wolf and his warriors were there, hidden in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to strike. The chief caught her eye and nodded slightly, a signal that help was coming. I'll make you a deal, Garrett said to Sullivan. You and your boys ride away now, and I'll let you live. Try to stop me and the girl dies first, then you. You can't do that, Sullivan replied. I've got my own employers to answer to. Employers? Garrett's eyes narrowed. What employers? The kind who pay better than you do, Sullivan said. The kind who want those treaties for themselves. Emma realized that this was about more than just money. These men were fighting over documents that could reshape the entire territory, that could determine the fate of thousands of people. Who are you working for? Garrett demanded. People who understand the real value of what you found, Sullivan replied. People who know how to use information like this to change history. Government men, does it matter? The point is, you're not walking away from this. Those treaties are too important to leave in the hands of a small-time crook. Garrett's face darkened with rage. Small-time, I've been fighting and killing and stealing for 20 years. I've earned this. You've earned a rope, Sullivan said coldly. But my employers are willing to be generous. Give us the treaties and we'll let you live. Keep them and you die here tonight. Emma felt Garrett's grip tighten on her arm. She could sense his desperation, his growing realization that he was trapped. And desperate men, she'd learned, were the most dangerous kind. I've got a better idea, Garrett said. How about I kill the girl right now just to show you I'm serious? Then we can negotiate from a position of mutual respect. His finger started to tighten on the trigger, and Emma knew she was out of time. She threw herself sideways, breaking free from Garrett's grip as his gun fired wide. The night exploded into chaos. Running Wolf and his warriors emerged from the shadows, their war cries echoing across the valley. Sullivan's men opened fire, their muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness like deadly fireworks. Emma rolled behind the stone wall of the root cellar, her heart hammering as bullets whined overhead. She could hear Garrett cursing Sullivan, shouting orders, warriors screaming as they charged into battle. Through the chaos, she saw Garrett running toward the horses, the portfolio clutched against his chest. He was trying to escape to get away with the treaties that had cost so many lives. Emma grabbed a fallen rifle and took aim. The shot was long and the light was poor, but she'd learned to shoot from White Bull, and his lessons had been thorough. She squeezed the trigger, and Garrett stumbled, blood spreading across his back. But he didn't fall. He kept running, reached his horse, and hauled himself into the saddle. For a moment, Emma thought he might escape after all. Then Running Wolf appeared seemingly from nowhere, his tomahawk gleaming in the moonlight. He brought it down with all his strength, and Garrett pitched forward off his horse, the portfolio flying from his hands. The battle was over almost as quickly as it had begun. Sullivan's men were down, their professional training no match for Lakota warriors fighting on familiar ground. Sullivan himself was wounded, but alive, his hands pressed against a bleeding shoulder. Emma ran to where the portfolio had fallen, gathering the scattered documents. These were the real treaties, the ones that could give the Lakota legal claim to their ancestral lands. Her father had died protecting them, and now they were in her hands. "What will you do with them?" she asked Running Wolf. "Take them to the territorial court," he replied. "Fight for our rights in the white man's way. Your parents showed us that some whites can be trusted, that justice is possible if we're willing to fight for it." Emma looked at the documents, at the careful legal language that represented hope for an entire people. "I'll go with you. I'll testify about how my father protected these, about what they mean." Running Wolf smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since Little Sparrow's death. "Your mother would be proud. She always said you had the heart of a warrior." Over the following days, Emma helped prepare for the journey to the territorial capital. The treaties were carefully preserved, documented, prepared for legal presentation. She would serve as a key witness, her testimony crucial to establishing the document's authenticity. But first, she had one last duty to perform. She returned to her parents' graves, carrying fresh wildflowers and a heavy heart. The wooden cross had been repaired, her mother's name carefully recarved. Beside it, a new marker honored her father, not just as a rancher, but as a man who tried to do right by people he'd wronged. "I understand now," she whispered to the silent earth. "Why you made the choices you did. Why you hid the truth from me. You were trying to protect me, but you were also trying to protect something bigger than ourselves." She placed the flowers in the mason jar, lupine and Indian paintbrush flowers that grew wild and free in the mountain meadows. As she worked, she felt a presence beside her, not her mother's ghost, but her mother's love, eternal and unchanging. "I'm going to finish what you started," Emma said. "I'm going to help Running Wolf's people get their land back. I'm going to be the bridge between worlds that you always wanted to be." She touched the silver necklace at her throat, a gift from Running Wolf, inscribed with her mother's Lakota name, Dancing Flame. She was Emma Whitmore, daughter of a white rancher and a Cheyenne survivor. She was Dancing Flame, daughter of two worlds, guardian of her mother's legacy. The journey to the territorial capital took 2 weeks, but it was successful beyond their wildest dreams. The treaties were authenticated, their legal validity confirmed. The territorial court ruled that the Lakota had legitimate claim to vast portions of Montana territory, and that the government had violated its own laws in taking their land. It wasn't a complete victory. There were appeals, negotiations, compromises. But it was a beginning, a foundation upon which something better could be built. Emma returned to the valley one last time 6 months later. She'd been living in the territorial capital, working as a translator and advocate for various tribes. The work was hard, often frustrating, but it gave her life meaning. The ranch had been rebuilt, but not as a cattle operation. Instead, it had become a trading post, a place where white settlers and Native Americans could meet on neutral ground. Emma had used her share of the reward money from the treaty case to fund the project, creating something her mother would have been proud of. She knelt beside her parents' graves, now surrounded by a small garden. The flowers were blooming lupine and Indian paintbrush, growing wild and free. The wooden crosses had been replaced with more permanent markers inscribed with words in both English and Lakota. "I did it," she told them quietly. "I kept the promises you couldn't keep. I built the bridge you dreamed of." The trading post was thriving, serving as a model for peaceful coexistence between two peoples who'd been enemies for too long. There were still tensions, those who opposed what Emma was trying to do. But there were also those who supported her, who believed that peace was possible. As the sun set behind the mountains, Emma rose from her knees and walked toward the trading post. Children were playing in the yard, white children and Native American children learning each other's languages, sharing each other's games. She was no longer the frightened girl who'd knelt beside her mother's grave with flowers in her hands. She was a woman who'd found her purpose, who'd learned to dance with her fears and transform them into something beautiful. The last flowers for her mother's grave had been placed with love and hope. Now Emma was planting new seeds in the world, seeds that would grow into something her mother could never have imagined, a future where the bridge between worlds was not just a dream, but a reality. Behind her, the wooden crosses stood guard over the graves of two people who tried to do right in a world that made righteousness difficult. Their sacrifices had not been in vain. Their daughter had taken up their cause and made it her own, and in doing so had found a way to honor both her white heritage and her Native American spirit. The dance with fear had become a dance with hope, and Emma Whitmore, dancing flame, was ready to keep dancing for as long as it took to build the world her mother had dreamed of. In the distance, a hawk circled on the evening thermals, its cry echoing across the valley. Emma smiled, remembering her mother's words, "Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's dancing with it." She was still dancing, and she always would be.